Imagine sitting by a flickering fire 40,000 years ago, your skin wrapped in animal hide, your tribe silent, the night air brittle with tension. Suddenly, a howl pierces the darkness. Not a wolf. Something deeper, older, chilling. Your elders exchange glances, not of confusion, but recognition. They've heard that sound before, and they never speak of it during daylight. Because cavemen had nightmares too, and the things they feared weren't just stories. The fire was life. Not warmth, not just light. It was a barrier, the last fragile line between early humans and the horrors that prowled just beyond the flickering edge of visibility. And the night. The night belonged to something else. In the Paleolithic world, being human meant being hunted. You were not at the top of the food chain. You were meat, slow, soft, and blind in the dark. And predators, they knew that. Start with the cave hyena, larger than the ones we see today, with bone-crushing jaws and the terrifying habit of hunting in packs. These weren't scavengers. They coordinated, circled, and waited. They didn't just find humans, they tracked them. And then the short-faced bear, standing nearly 12 feet tall on hind legs, capable of outrunning a man over short distances. It wasn't curious, it was hungry. Fossils show it roamed through regions where early humans settled, possibly even dragging their kills into the same caves our ancestors once called home. Imagine it, you're a child, half asleep in the crook of your mother's arms when the wind shifts. The air turns cold, the adults freeze. One of them grabs a torch, eyes wide. The elders don't need to say a word. Everyone knows something is watching. And worse, some predators didn't roar. They didn't stalk. They waited. Enter the ambush cats, like the now extinct American lion, larger than modern African lions, capable of silence that made them ghosts of the forest. No warning, no sound, just impact, teeth, and blood. These weren't mythical monsters. They were real. Their bones lie buried in the same soil where humans left footprints. And what we feared shaped us. Because long before, we had weapons, walls, or language. We had fear. And fear kept us alive. Imagine walking through a forest without a trail. No boots, no flashlight, no map, just your breath, the crunch of leaves, and the thick silence of something watching you from the trees. For early humans, this wasn't a nightmare. It was every day. Because survival meant knowing what didn't want to be seen. Let's talk about the leopards. Yes, the same species we still know today. But in the ancient world, they were apex predators in regions where humans had no dominance. They didn't chase. They climbed trees and waited. Archaeological sites show ancient human skulls with puncture marks on the back, wounds from above. Kills from creatures that didn't just hunt, they studied. This fear of what we can't see, it's hardwired into us. That spine chill when you turn your back to the woods, that wasn't paranoia. That was genetic memory. Now shift to water, rivers, lakes, the places you go to drink, to bathe, to survive. Enter giant crocodilians. Species like Deinosuchus, a 30-foot ambush predator lurking in the shallows. Humans may have never seen it coming. One moment bending for a drink, the next gone. No scream, no trail, just ripples and red foam. Even worse were the things we never found bones for. Creatures that might have existed in regions we haven't fully excavated. Unknown predators that slip through time with no name, no story, just fear left behind in fireside tailies and cautious footsteps. And what did our ancestors do? They drew circles of stones. They watched the tree line. They sang to the stars and buried their dead close to camp, not out of reverence, but to protect them. Because monsters didn't live under the bed. They lived beyond the fire. And in the ancient world, the most terrifying thing wasn't being hunted. It was never knowing by what. Imagine the moment the sun dips below the horizon. There's no street lamp, no torchlight. Just a fire flickering weakly against the endless dark. To ancient humans, night wasn't rest. It was a gamble. Because the predators didn't sleep when we did. Wolves with larger bodies and thicker hides than modern ones patrolled the forests in packs, not afraid of fire, just waiting for it to die. Some remains show signs of ancient humans who were pulled from the edges of camps. Drag marks in the soil, crushed bones, a struggle in the dark no one saw, but everyone heard. And if you traveled north, you might face the cave hyena, far bigger than the ones we know today, with jaws capable of snapping femurs. They didn't scavenge, they hunted, in organized packs. Fast, smart, and completely unafraid of humans, they would tail hunting parties for miles, waiting for the weak to fall behind. But there was something worse than any predator. The cold. During Ice Age nights, temperatures could plummet in minutes. If your firewood ran out, if the wind shifted wrong, if your shelter wasn't airtight with furs, your blood would slow. Muscles would stiffen. Skin would blacken. Death wasn't always violent. Sometimes it just crept in silently while you slept. The darkness didn't need claws to kill. And here's the strangest part, despite all this. They went back out. Night after night. Hunting, guarding, storytelling by embers, whispering warnings to children, drawing lines in ash around sleeping bodies. Because even when the world was filled with monsters, we still stayed, still fought, still lit fires against the void. That resilience, the courage to stare into pitch black knowing something was watching, is why you're even here to hear this. You think cavemen weren't afraid. They were. They just didn't have the luxury to run from it. They faced it. And then they became something more. Imagine walking through a forest 50,000 years ago. You hear birds, leaves crackle underfoot, everything feels normal. Until it is. Something moves between the trees, not a tiger, not a bear. Something standing, watching. But it's not human. At least, not your kind of human. Its arms are too long, face too flat, teeth too big. And when it steps into the light, it vanishes again. Not because it's gone. Because your brain refuses to register what it just saw. That was Homo floresiensis, often called the Hobbit. Standing barely 3 feet tall, this ancient human species lived on the Indonesian island of Flores. It used stone tools, hunted dwarf elephants, and may have survived until just 12,000 years ago. That's so recent. Some local tribes have actual stories passed down of small, hairy people who lived deep in the jungle and disappeared if chased. Now here's the twist. Homo floresiensis had a tiny brain, far smaller than ours. But it hunted, it cooked, it may have spoken. It shouldn't have been capable of doing those things. But it did. So what else lived out there? How about Homo naledi, discovered in a deep South African cave? A species with hands like ours, feet built for walking, and a skull shaped like something from a horror movie. It lived 250,000 years ago, possibly the same time Homo sapiens were evolving. But here's the catch. It buried its dead. In sacred chambers. Deep underground. And if that sounds normal, it is. Burial requires symbolic thought, ritual, abstract reasoning. We thought only we did that. Until Homo naledi ruined the theory. So let's ask the uncomfortable question. If these other humans had rituals, used tools, told stories, why do we treat them like monsters? Maybe the real reason they're disturbing is because they aren't monsters. They're mirrors. Just weird enough to make us question what being human even means. Islands are strange places. Cut off from the rest of the world, evolution takes a different path. Animals shrink or swell, predators vanish, new rules take hold. And humans, they get weirder. Let's return to Flores Island, home of the hobbit species, Homo floresiensis. This island wasn't just isolated, it was a crucible for bizarre biology. Picture a tiny human hunting a tiny elephant. That's not fantasy. That's real. The elephants, dwarf stegodons, once mighty, now knee-high. The humans, just 3 feet tall, with brains smaller than a chimp. Yet they carved tools, started fires, and survived predators, including giant Komodo dragons. How? One theory, the island rule, a biological principle that says large animals get smaller and small animals get larger when isolated for long periods. Why? Scarce food, no big predators, limited space. But here, the haunting part. Homo floresiensis may not have started small. It may have been a regular Homo erectus, the same early human species that spread through Africa and Asia. Over generations, stranded on Flores, they shrank. Physically, but not mentally. They adapted. And the more we study them, the less we understand where their limits were. Now zoom out. Flores isn't the only place where this happened. In the Philippines, bones of another tiny species were found, Homo luzonensis. Similar height, similar features, but different enough to be a whole new branch on the human family tree. Are we looking at a pattern? Did isolation give birth to a hidden population of small, strange humans we never knew existed? Are there more? Did some survive longer than we realize? Because if stories from local tribes are even partly true, if sightings of tiny jungle dwellers are more than legend, then maybe. Maybe these extinct humans aren't extinct at all. Maybe we're not alone in the woods. Here's the thing about nightmares. Sometimes they're real, and we just bury them under stories. Take Neanderthals, for example. We used to think of them as grunting, brutish cave dwellers. Now, we know they buried their dead. They may have painted, they cared for the injured. Some even had red hair and freckles. They were more like us than we ever wanted to believe. But some weren't. Some bones found in remote European caves don't fully match Homo sapiens or Neanderthals. Massive brow ridges, unusual jaw shapes, teeth that don't belong to anything on record. And then there's Denisova Cave in Siberia. Out of nowhere, a child's finger bone and a molar. That's it. Yet DNA showed something shocking. A whole new branch of humanity. The Denisovans are ghost lineage. We don't know what they looked like. We barely have their bones. But their genes, they're inside us, up to 5% in some modern populations, especially in Oceania and Southeast Asia. They were real. They lived alongside us. And they vanished without a trace. Or so we thought. Because in a high-altitude Tibetan cave, 10,000 feet up, researchers found a Denisovan jawbone. No tools, no artwork, just presence. They had no monuments. No stories passed down. Only DNA whispering that they were here. And perhaps the scariest thing of all, they were smart, strong, well-adapted. Maybe even better suited for survival than us. So why did they disappear? Did we absorb them? Or erase them? We may never know. But every fossil, every fragment, every scrap of evidence paints the same chilling picture. We are not the only version of human that could have ruled the world. We are just the one that made it through. And the bones we dig up now, the ones we can't explain, are more than history. They're warnings. Proof that nature doesn't always play by rules we understand. When the sun dipped below the horizon in the Stone Age, that's when the real danger began. No fire meant no safety. No moon meant no sight. And no tribe meant no chance. To us, darkness means low visibility. To prehistoric humans, it meant exposure to predators, to the unknown, to death. Imagine lying in a forest clearing in 40,000 BCE. You've spent the day foraging, dodging snakes, building traps, maybe even fighting off another group. Now the stars are out, and you hear something moving through the brush. Not a leaf falling, not wind, but deliberate movement, heavy, controlled. Do you run? Hide? Hope it passes? This is where our primal brain evolved. This is where fear was carved into our DNA. Our ancestors weren't paranoid, they were practical. Because the night belonged to things, we weren't equipped to fight. Lions, hyenas, saber-toothed cats. Even massive, now extinct birds like the Haast's eagle, with a wingspan wider than a human is tall, hunted in low light and silence. And not all threats walked on four legs. Other humans, or near humans, lurked too. Raiding rival camps, stealing food, kidnapping children. Stone weapons didn't require a battlefield, they required opportunity. And nighttime was opportunity. There's evidence in archaeological digs of shelters, burned down with people still inside. Of skeletons showing signs of violent trauma, not from animals, but tools. So when we say cavemen had nightmares, they weren't imaginary. They were predictive. They were reminders of what waited when fire ran low and eyelids dropped. Fear was a survival instinct, a necessary signal. Stay alert, stay close, stay warm. In fact, some scientists believe our sleep cycles, the way we wake up briefly in the middle of the night, may come from ancient patterns of keeping watch in rotating shifts. Because if your entire tribe slept deeply at once, you were already dead. We talk about the food chain like it's some abstract diagram from biology class. But to prehistoric humans, it was life management. You weren't always the hunter. Often, you were the hunted. And at night, the rules of the hunt flipped. Many predators had one evolutionary advantage over us. They could see in the dark, or worse, they didn't need to. They could smell, stalk, and strike without being seen. Lions and hyenas were already terrifying, but now add short-faced bears, creatures twice the size of modern grizzlies, with longer limbs and terrifying speed. Or dire wolves, whose bone-crushing jaws could shred through mammoth hide. And then there's the European cave lion, larger than today's African lions, and often stalking in packs. Fire helped, but it wasn't a wall. It could flicker, die. And if the wood ran out, so did your protection. Evidence suggests many ancient campsites were circled with ash, not for cooking, but as warning rings, where even a single pawprint could signal what prowled nearby. But sometimes, they didn't have time to warn. Cave paintings in southern France, ones believed to be over 30,000 years old, show not just animals peacefully grazing, but violent clashes, stampedes, and even creatures with blood around their jaws. You might say, well, maybe that's symbolic. Maybe. But some archaeologists believe those drawings were records, almost like prehistoric journals, of what they saw and survived. We assume those paintings are art. But what if they were warnings? What if those images, those figures snarling in torchlight, weren't decorations? They were memories. And when your world was made of dirt, blood, and breath, the monsters didn't need horns. They just needed teeth, and the silence of night to find you. Even as humanity evolved, building shelters, learning to make tools, lighting fires that burned longer, one thing didn't change. We still feared the dark. It's baked into us, not just as children afraid of the closet, but as a species with 2.5 million years of reasons to be afraid. You might have lights now, street lamps, smartphone flashlights, a ceiling bulb you flick on with a lazy finger. But that doesn't erase what came before you. Your ancestors slept in shifts, one always watching. They huddled closer when they heard branches snap. They carved spears not only to hunt, but to defend the fire when it started to die. Some neuroscientists believe our brain's amygdala, the part that processes fear, became so hyperactive over millennia because it had to. If you weren't afraid of the dark, you didn't live long. And the echoes of that survival mechanism are still with us. Why do horror movies almost always begin in the dark? Why does a power outage make your heart race for no reason? Why do you sometimes wake up at 3 a.m. and just feel watched? Because deep down in the architecture of your biology, there's a signal still firing from the Stone Age. A whisper that says, something moved out there. You're not crazy. You're just connected to something older than memory. And the most haunting part, maybe cavemen weren't afraid of shadows because of what they imagined. Maybe they were afraid of shadows because they remembered what used to step out of them. So the next time you flick on a light to chase away the dark, remember, it's not just convenience. It's a 2 million-year-old act of rebellion. A signal to the beasts, real or remembered, that you survived. And if you found yourself wondering what else ancient humans feared that we've forgotten, hit that subscribe button. Because the past isn't done whispering yet. Oh, next time you imagine prehistoric life, rough men around fires, hunting mammoths, carving tools, remember this. They were afraid, just like us. Afraid of the night, of the silence, of the eyes watching from the trees, of the child that wouldn't stop coughing, of the tribe that never returned. These weren't just hunters. They were survivors, haunted by things they couldn't understand and sometimes couldn't even name. Their nightmares weren't fairy tales. They were real. And somehow, through all of it, we're still here. Because they ran. Because they hid. Because they remembered what to fear. And maybe so should we. If this story pulled you in, even just for a few minutes, then there's more waiting. More forgotten truths. More fires still burning beneath the ash. So go ahead. Tap subscribe. Join the tribe. And every week, I'll bring you one more piece of the past. One more nightmare that made us human. Until then, sleep light. Because some stories don't stay buried.